Hashtag the silent touch. First document, the medical bay of the Zephyrian transport ship Gentle Current hummed with anxiety. Dr. Calera's 4 arms moved frantically over her newborn daughter, checking vital signs that all registered normal. Yet the infant's piercing wails continued to echo through the sterile chambers. The baby's crystalline skin flickered between deep purple and angry red, a clear sign of distress among her aquatic species. "Please, little star," Calera whispered in her native tongue, her gills fluttering with worry. "Tell Mama what's wrong." 3 cycles had passed since the birth, and nothing seemed to comfort the child. The ship's automated systems had run every diagnostic possible. The infant was healthy, well-fed, and showed no signs of physical ailment. Yet her cries grew stronger with each passing hour, a sound that cut through the hearts of every crew member aboard the vessel. Captain Thurix entered the medical bay, his massive reptilian frame filling the doorway. The Saurian officer's scales had shifted to a muted brown, reflecting his concern. "Doctor, we're receiving complaints from the civilian passengers. The crying is affecting morale." Calera's primary arms continued their gentle examination, while her secondary arms adjusted the environmental controls. "I understand, Captain, but I cannot determine the cause. Every test shows she is perfectly healthy." The captain's forked tongue flicked out, tasting the stress hormones in the air. "Perhaps we should consider the human's offer." "Absolutely not." Calera's response was immediate and firm. Her skin flashed bright orange, a sign of indignation. "I will not have some primitive alien handling my daughter." The human in question was Marcus Chun, a xenobiologist traveling aboard the Gentle Current as part of a cultural exchange program. The Terran had approached the medical bay twice, offering assistance, only to be politely but firmly declined. Calera, like most civilized species in the Galactic Federation, viewed humans as curiosities at best, dangerous primitives at worst. Humans had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel, stumbling into galactic society a mere 50 standard years ago. They were known for their unusual emotional responses, their tendency toward violence, and their disturbing ability to form attachments with virtually any living creature. Most species found their behavior unpredictable and somewhat unsettling. "Doctor," Captain Thurix said gently, "the human has extensive experience with infant care across multiple species. His credentials were thoroughly vetted before he was accepted into the exchange program. His species still engages in warfare among themselves," Calera protested. Her voice rising above her daughter's continued wailing. "They consume other living creatures for sustenance. They keep animals as companions for no logical reason. How could such a being understand the delicate needs of a Zephyrian infant?" The captain's scales shifted to a deeper brown, nearly black. "Doctor, with respect, your daughter has been crying for 3 cycles. Our medical systems have found nothing wrong. The human's offer is genuine, and his qualifications are impressive." Before Calera could respond, the medical bay doors hissed open. Marcus Chun stood in the doorway, his pale skin glistening with perspiration from the ship's humid atmosphere designed for aquatic species. He was tall by human standards, with kind brown eyes and calloused hands that spoke of practical experience. "Forgive the intrusion," Marcus said, his voice barely audible over the infant's cries. "I couldn't help but overhear. May I just observe?" Calera's 4 eyes focused on him with suspicion. "What could you possibly learn from observation that our advanced medical systems cannot?" Marcus stepped closer, his movements slow and non-threatening. His gaze fell upon the crying infant, and something in his expression shifted. The hard lines around his eyes softened, and a gentle smile touched his lips. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "it's not about what's wrong. Sometimes it's about what's missing." The baby's cries seemed to intensify as Marcus approached, but he didn't flinch or step back. Instead, he moved to a chair across from the medical table and simply sat down, making himself small and unthreatening. "In my experience with young ones," Marcus continued, his voice taking on a rhythmic, soothing quality They often cry not because they're hurt or sick, but because they're trying to communicate something we don't understand. Calera watched suspiciously as Marcus began to hum, a low, melodious sound that seemed to resonate through the medical bay. It wasn't a Zephyrian lullaby, nor any song from the known galactic cultures. It was distinctly human, primitive by galactic standards, yet there was something hauntingly beautiful about it. The infant's cries began to change, becoming less frantic, though they didn't stop entirely. Marcus continued his gentle humming, occasionally adding soft words in what Calera recognized as an ancient human language. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern. "Just letting her know she's not alone," Marcus replied, never taking his eyes off the baby. Sometimes that's all they need to hear. Captain Thurix observed the scene with growing fascination. The human's behavior was unlike anything he'd witnessed in his 40 years of space travel. There was no advanced technology involved, no sophisticated medical procedures, just a simple acknowledgement of the infant's distress and a gentle response to it. As the minutes passed, the baby's cries gradually softened. Her crystalline skin began to shift from angry red back toward its natural pale blue. Her tiny arms, which had been thrashing frantically, began to slow their movements. "This is impossible," Calera whispered, all four of her arms now motionless as she stared at her daughter. "Nothing has changed. The human hasn't even touched her." Marcus continued his quiet humming, occasionally varying the melody. "Physical comfort is important," he said softly, "but emotional comfort is just as vital. Your daughter isn't sick, doctor. She's lonely." "Lonely?" Calera's voice carried a note of disbelief. "She's been with me constantly since birth. How could she be lonely?" Being with someone and feeling connected to them are different things, Marcus explained, his voice maintaining that same gentle rhythm. "She can sense your stress, your worry, your fear. Those emotions are amplifying her own distress." The baby's cries had now reduced to soft whimpers, her tiny chest rising and falling in a more regular pattern. Her skin continued to lighten, and for the first time since her birth, she seemed to be relaxing. "You're suggesting that my emotional state is affecting my daughter?" Calera asked, her scientific mind grappling with the concept. "Infants of most species are incredibly sensitive to the emotional atmosphere around them," Marcus replied. "When they sense stress or anxiety, they often respond with distress of their own. It's a survival mechanism, really. In nature, a calm parent usually means a safe environment." Captain Thurix leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. "This is a recognized phenomenon in human child rearing." Marcus nodded, still maintaining his gentle humming between words. "We've known about it for thousands of years, though we only recently understood the science behind it. Infants can detect minute changes in body language, vocal patterns, even chemical signals that adults release when they're stressed. But our medical systems should have detected such interactions," Calera protested, though her voice had lost some of its earlier hostility. "Your medical systems are incredibly advanced," Marcus acknowledged, "but they're designed to detect physical ailments and measure biological functions. They're not programmed to recognize the subtleties of emotional communication between parent and child." The baby's whimpers had now faded to occasional soft sounds, almost like tiny sighs. Her movements had become gentle and exploratory rather than distressed, and her skin had settled into a peaceful shade of light blue. "How did you know?" Calera asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus finally looked up from the infant to meet Calera's eyes. "Because I recognized the sound, not the crying itself, but the pattern of it. It's the same across most species I've encountered. It's not a cry of pain or hunger or physical discomfort. It's a cry that says, I need to feel safe and loved. And your humming provides this?" Captain Thurix asked, clearly fascinated by this primitive yet effective intervention. "The humming is just a way of showing that someone is present and come," Marcus explained. "It's not magic or advanced technology. It's just connection, recognition that she exists and matters." Calera looked down at her daughter, who was now lying peacefully, her tiny arms moving in slow, graceful patterns. For the first time since the birth, the infant's eyes were open and alert rather than squeezed shut in distress. "I don't understand," Calera said, her own voice now calm and wondering. "I love my daughter more than life itself." "How could you not feel that?" "Love isn't always communicated the way we intend," Marcus replied gently. "Your love was mixed with worry and fear, which she could sense. When I sat down and hummed, I wasn't worried about fixing her or diagnosing her problem. I was just present with her in that moment." The medical bay fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems and the occasional tiny sound from the now peaceful infant. Calera's forearms moved to gently stroke her daughter's crystalline skin, and for the first time, the baby responded with what appeared to be contentment. "This seems too simple," Captain Thurix observed. "Too primitive." Marcus smiled, finally standing from his chair. "Sometimes the most advanced solutions are the simplest ones. Your daughter doesn't need sophisticated technology or complex medical interventions. She just needed to feel heard and acknowledged." As Marcus moved toward the door, preparing to leave the family in peace, Calera's voice stopped him. "Wait," she called softly. "How did you learn this?" This understanding of emotional communication. Marcus paused at the threshold, his expression thoughtful. Humans have been caring for their young in hostile environments for hundreds of thousands of years. We learned early that survival often depends not just on physical protection, but on emotional bonds. A child who feels secure and loved is more likely to thrive, even in difficult circumstances. And this knowledge, it applies to other species as well. "Life recognizes life," Marcus replied simply. "The need for connection, for feeling valued and safe, seems to be universal. The expressions might differ, but the underlying need is the same." With that, Marcus Chun left the medical bay, leaving behind a peaceful infant, a wondering mother, and a captain who was beginning to question everything he thought he knew about the primitive species called humanity. Hashtag the silent touch. Second document, word of the incident in the medical bay spread through the gentle current like ripples across still water. By the next cycle, every passenger and crew member had heard some version of the story about the human who had somehow soothed the crying Zephyrian infant without laying a finger on her. Marcus Chun sat in the ship's observation lounge, watching the swirling colors of hyperspace through the transparent aluminum viewports. He'd hoped for quiet reflection, but his solitude was interrupted by the arrival of HFY, a tall, ethereal luminary whose translucent skin pulsed with soft bioluminescent patterns. "Mr. Chun," HFY said, their voice carrying the musical quality typical of their species. "I hope I am not intruding." Marcus gestured to an empty chair across from him. "Please join me, and call me Marcus." HFY settled into the specially designed seat that accommodated their elongated limbs. Their bioluminescent patterns shifted to what Marcus had learned indicated curiosity mixed with uncertainty. "I've been thinking about what occurred yesterday," HFY began. "Among my people, we pride ourselves on our advanced understanding of consciousness and mental states. Yet what you accomplished with Dr. Calera's daughter, it challenges much of what we believe about interspecies communication." Marcus studied the aliens' shifting light patterns. The Luminari were known throughout the galaxy as philosophers and psychologists. Their abilities to read and influence mental states legendary among the Federation species. "What exactly challenges you about it?" Marcus asked. "We have sophisticated techniques for mental influence and emotional manipulation," HFY explained, their patterns brightening. "Years of training, complex neural interface technology, deep understanding of synaptic patterns. Yet you achieved something similar with what appeared to be humming." "I wasn't trying to manipulate anyone's emotions," Marcus replied. "I was just acknowledging them." "But that seems impossible." HFY's patterns flickered rapidly, indicating agitation. "Emotional states cannot be altered through such primitive means. There must be some hidden technology, some pheromone release, some undiscovered human ability." Before Marcus could respond, The lounge doors opened to admit Captain Thurix and Chief Engineer Karath, a stocky Vorthack whose rocky, mineral-based physiology made them one of the few species capable of maintaining the ship's exotic matter containment systems. Marcus, Captain Thurix said, approaching with obvious purpose. "We were hoping to speak with you." "Of course," Marcus replied, gesturing for them to join the conversation. Karath's crystalline eye clusters focused on Marcus with mechanical precision. "We have been analyzing the sensor data from the medical bay during yesterday's incident. We expected to find some form of energy emission, subsonic frequencies, electromagnetic fields, something to explain what occurred." "And?" Marcus prompted. "Nothing," Karath said flatly. "No detectable technological influence whatsoever. According to our instruments, all you did was sit in a chair and make vocal sounds within normal human ranges." Vexai's bioluminescent patterns shifted to deep blues and purples, indicating profound confusion. This creates a significant problem for our understanding of interspecies psychology. Captain Thurix settled his massive frame into a reinforced chair. "Marcus, we need to understand what happened. The implications could be significant for Federation policy regarding human integration into galactic society." Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching the swirling colors of hyperspace. Finally, he spoke. "What if I told you that what I did was actually quite normal by human standards? That most humans would have responded similarly in that situation." The three aliens exchanged glances, their various methods of nonverbal communication creating a complex dance of colors, scale shifts, and crystalline refractions. "That would be concerning," Captain Thurix admitted. "If humans possess some form of natural empathic ability that our science cannot detect or measure." "It's not empathic ability," Marcus interrupted gently. "At least, not in the way you're thinking. It's learned behavior. Cultural conditioning, if you will." Karatha's eye clusters rotated independently, a sign of intense focus. "Explain." Marcus leaned back in his chair, organizing his thoughts. "Humans evolved as tribal creatures. Our survival depended on our ability to work together, to understand and respond to each other's needs. Over thousands of generations, we developed what you might call emotional intelligence. All species require cooperation for survival." Vexai pointed out, their patterns shifting to skeptical yellows. "True, but most species developed other solutions first," Marcus continued. "The Luminari developed mental manipulation abilities. The Saurians developed strict hierarchical structures. The Vorthack developed individual self-sufficiency. Humans developed emotional connection." Emotional connection as a survival strategy? Captain Thurix's scales had shifted to an interested green. "Think about it," Marcus said, warming to the subject. "Humans are physically weak compared to most galactic species. We're not particularly fast or strong. We don't have natural armor or weapons. We can't manipulate mental states or process raw minerals for sustenance. So how did you survive?" Karath asked. "By being absolutely fantastic at understanding what others are feeling and responding appropriately. A human who could read the emotional state of their tribe, anticipate their needs, and provide comfort or support was invaluable for group survival." Vexai's patterns had shifted to rapid, complex swirls that Marcus recognized as intense intellectual processing. "You're suggesting that what we witnessed was not an advanced ability, but a primitive survival skill." "Not primitive," Marcus corrected. "Highly refined through evolutionary pressure. When your species was developing telepathic abilities, mine was learning to read micro-expressions, vocal tones, body language, and chemical signals. When your people were building advanced technology, mine was perfecting the art of emotional communication." Captain Thurix leaned forward, his massive head tilting with interest. "And this ability works across species lines?" "Life recognizes life." Marcus repeated his phrase from the previous day. "The basic emotional needs, the fundamental expressions of distress or contentment, these seem to be universal constants. A cry of loneliness sounds similar whether it comes from a human infant, a Zephyrian baby, or a young Saurian hatchling. But our psychological profiles of humans suggest you're aggressive, violent, unpredictable, Vexhai protested, their patterns now showing confusion mixed with concern. Marcus nodded sadly. We could be all of those things, but we're also capable of incredible empathy and self-sacrifice. The same emotional intensity that can drive us to violence also drives us to protect and nurture others, even at cost to ourselves. This emotional intensity, Karath said, their voice taking on an analytical tone, it explains several anomalies we've observed in human behavior, such as your species' tendency to form bonds with non-intelligent creatures, your willingness to risk your lives for strangers, your ability to find beauty in things that serve no practical purpose. Karatha's eye clusters all focused on Marcus. These behaviors have puzzled galactic sociologists for decades. They're all expressions of the same underlying trait, Marcus explained. Humans are wired to connect. We see a creature in distress, and our instinctive response is to help, regardless of species or even intelligence level. We see beauty, and we want to share that experience with others. Vexhai's bioluminescent patterns had stabilized into steady, contemplative blues. This suggests that human emotional responses are not random or primitive, but highly evolved and sophisticated. In some ways, yes, Marcus agreed, though it comes with costs. Our emotional intensity can be overwhelming for species that are more controlled in their responses. Captain Thurix's scales shifted through several colors before settling on a thoughtful amber. Marcus, what you've described changes how we should view human integration into galactic society. How so? We've been treating humans as a species that needs to be civilized, taught proper behavior, brought up to galactic standards, the captain explained. But what you're suggesting is that humans already possess highly advanced social skills, just different from what we're used to. That's exactly what I'm suggesting, Marcus said. Humans don't need to learn how to connect with others. We need to learn how to connect appropriately within galactic cultural norms. Karatha's crystalline features shifted into what Marcus had learned to recognize as their equivalent of a smile. You realize this conversation will need to be reported to the Federation Council. Why? Because it suggests that current human integration protocols may be not just inadequate, but counterproductive, Captain Thurix explained. We've been trying to suppress human emotional responses when we should be learning how to channel them constructively. Vexhai's patterns had brightened considerably. More than that, it suggests humans might have valuable skills to teach other species. Your ability to provide emotional support across species lines could revolutionize fields like medicine, education, even diplomacy. Marcus looked around at the three aliens, seeing genuine curiosity and respect in their expressions where before there had been polite tolerance at best. You understand, this is just one human's perspective. I can't speak for my entire species. Perhaps not, Captain Thurix said, but you've given us a framework for understanding human behavior that makes much more sense than our previous assumptions. And Vexhai added, their patterns now showing excitement. It suggests possibilities for cooperation between species that we never considered before. As the conversation continued into the ship's evening cycle, Marcus realized that something fundamental had shifted. The other species were no longer looking at humans as primitive newcomers who needed guidance. Instead, they were beginning to see humanity as a species with unique and valuable capabilities that could benefit the entire galactic community. The implications of that shift would prove to be far more significant than any of them could imagine. Hashtag the silent touch. Third document 6 months after the incident aboard the Gentle Current. Marcus Chen stood in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Federation Council on Nexus Prime, the political heart of galactic civilization. The hall's massive dome stretched above him, filled with hundreds of representatives from dozens of species, each in their specialized atmospheric sections. He was no longer just a xenobiologist on a cultural exchange program. Following Captain Thurix's report, and subsequent investigations, Marcus had been appointed as the first human representative to the Federation Council's newly formed Committee on Interspecies Emotional Intelligence. The proposal before us today, announced Chancellor Zephyx, a towering crystalline being whose voice resonated through the translation matrices, is unprecedented in Federation history. We are asked to consider establishing human-led emotional support protocols across all Federation medical facilities, educational institutions, and diplomatic missions. Murmurs filled the hall, a symphony of clicks, whistles, harmonics, and electromagnetic pulses as different species communicated their thoughts. Not all of the sounds were supportive. Ambassador Kethtar of the Rigid Mechanist Collective rose from their section, their metallic voice cutting through the noise. This council is being asked to accept that primitive emotional responses constitute advanced technology. The collective objects to this waste of resources based on unscientific speculation. Marcus had expected this opposition. The mechanists prized logic and efficiency above all else, viewing emotional responses as evolutionary weaknesses to be overcome rather than tools to be refined. Dr. Calera stood to respond, her forearms gesturing gracefully as she spoke. Honored colleagues, I was the skeptic in this situation. I resisted human assistance, believing our advanced medical systems superior to primitive methods. Her skin flickered with memory blues. I was wrong. My daughter, who suffered for 3 cycles despite our best technology, was calmed within minutes by human intervention. A single anecdotal incident proves nothing, Kethtar replied coldly. Correlation is not causation. The infant may have simply exhausted herself crying. Captain Thurix rose next, his massive frame commanding attention. The incident was not isolated. Over the past 6 months, human emotional support specialists have been deployed to 17 different crisis situations across Federation space. The results have been consistent and measurable. The hall's central display activated, showing statistical data compiled by Federation researchers. Emergency response times improved by 37% in situations where humans provided emotional support to victims. Medical recovery rates increased by an average of 23% when human counselors worked alongside traditional medical teams. Most dramatically, diplomatic negotiations that had stalled for months were resolved within days when human mediators were brought in to address underlying emotional tensions. Marcus stepped to the speaker's platform, feeling the weight of hundreds of alien gazes upon him. The translation matrix amplified his voice to reach every section of the vast hall. Honored representatives, he began, I understand the skepticism. What I'm proposing challenges fundamental assumptions about the nature of intelligence and advancement. But I ask you to consider the evidence before us. The display shifted to show footage from a most recent success story, a mining colony on Kepler 442b, where a catastrophic accident had trapped 57 workers underground. Traditional rescue efforts had focused on the physical challenges of extraction, but the trapped miners were succumbing to panic and despair. When human emotional support specialist Sarah Martinez was lowered into the mine shaft, she didn't bring advanced technology or miraculous healing powers, Marcus continued. She brought something far simpler and far more powerful. The ability to make each trapped miner feel heard, understood, and valued as an individual. The footage showed Martinez moving through the cramped, dangerous tunnels, spending just a few minutes with each trapped being. Saurian miners who had been thrashing in claustrophobic terror calmed as she acknowledged their fear and helped them focus on positive memories. Vorthack engineers who had shut down in depression began working again after she validated their feelings of failure and reminded them of their importance to their families. The rescue operation that was estimated to take 6 days was completed in 3, Marcus said. Not because our technology improved, but because the miners were able to work with their rescuers instead of against them. Ambassador Luxandra of the Luminari Coalition rose next, her bioluminescent patterns cycling through complex arrays. While these results are impressive, we must ask, are we discussing a genuine advancement, Or are we simply compensating for the Federation's failure to develop proper psychological support protocols? The question struck at the heart of the debate. If emotional intelligence was truly valuable, why hadn't other species developed it to the same degree? Vex High, who had become an unlikely advocate for human methods following their conversation on the Gentle Current, stood to address their fellow Luminari. Colleague Luxandra raises an important point. We developed mental manipulation abilities because they served our immediate needs. But consider this. Our abilities work only on species with similar neural architectures. Human emotional intelligence appears to work across all known forms of consciousness. Because it doesn't rely on direct neural interface, added Dr. Karoth, speaking from the Vorthack section. Human methods work through universal biological and behavioral cues that exist in some form across all sentient species. Marcus nodded his appreciation for the support before continuing. What we're proposing isn't the replacement of advanced Federation technology with primitive human methods. We're suggesting integration. Human emotional intelligence working alongside Luminari mental healing, Vorthack engineering precision, Saurian organizational efficiency, and all the other remarkable capabilities represented in this hall. The display shifted again, showing proposed integration protocols. Medical teams would include human emotional support specialists working with alien medical technology. Diplomatic missions would pair human mediators with species-specific experts. Educational programs would incorporate human empathy training with traditional academic curricula. The cost-benefit analysis is compelling, announced economist Prime Velthera from the Traders Consortium section. Initial investment in human training and integration protocols would be recovered within 4 standard years through improved efficiency across multiple sectors. But it was the next speaker who changed the entire dynamic of the debate. Chancellor Zefix's aide announced that Dr. Kalera's daughter, now 6 months old, was present in the gallery with her mother. Young Lirahai has been part of an ongoing study, Dr. Kalera explained, her voice carrying throughout the hall. Children who receive early emotional support from human specialists show measurable improvements in cognitive development, social adaptation, and stress resilience compared to control groups. The hall fell silent as tiny Lirahai made soft, musical sound from the gallery. Her crystalline skin glowed with healthy blue patterns, and her movements were confident and curious as she explored her environment. This child represents something new, Dr. Kalera continued. A generation that grows up understanding that intelligence comes in many forms, that strength can be found in gentleness, and that the most advanced response to another being's distress is not always the most technologically sophisticated one. Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest as he watched the infant. Even from this distance, he could sense her contentment, her security, her absolute trust in the beings caring for her. The real question before this council, he said, his voice softer now, but carrying clearly through the translation matrix, is not whether humans have something valuable to offer. The evidence for that is overwhelming. The question is whether the Federation is ready to expand its definition of advancement to include emotional intelligence alongside technological sophistication. The debate continued for several more hours, with representatives raising concerns about implementation logistics, cultural sensitivity, and resource allocation. But Marcus could sense a shift in the hall's emotional atmosphere. The resistance was weakening, replaced by genuine curiosity and cautious optimism. When the vote was finally called, the results were decisive. The integration of human emotional intelligence protocols was approved by a margin of 73%, with only the most rigid traditionalist factions maintaining their opposition. As representatives began filing out of the hall, many stopped to speak with Marcus personally. Some offered resources for implementation. Others shared their own species' insights into emotional communication. A few simply expressed gratitude for opening their minds to new possibilities. Dr. Kalera approached with little Lirahai in her arms. Marcus, I want you to know that what you've done here goes far beyond policy change. You've helped create a galaxy where beings like my daughter will grow up valued for their emotional gifts as much as their intellectual ones. Marcus gently touched the infant's tiny hand, marveling at how much had changed since that night on the gentle current, when all he had done was sit quietly and hum to a crying baby. I think, he said, watching Lirahai's skin glow with contentment at his touch, that we're all going to learn something amazing from each other. As the great hall emptied, Marcus remained for a few moments, looking up at the dome that represented the unity of hundreds of worlds and dozens of species. Somewhere among those stars, human emotional intelligence specialists were already at work, bringing comfort to the distressed, healing to the broken, and connection to the isolated. For the first time in galactic history, the primitive human ability to simply care about others was being recognized not as a weakness to be overcome, but as a strength to be celebrated and shared. The age of purely technological advancement was giving way to something new, an era where the sophistication of a civilization would be measured not just by its machines, but by its capacity for compassion. And it had all started with a crying baby and one human's instinct to offer comfort rather than solutions.